I moved into Maple Street at the tail end of spring, when the air still smelled faintly of lilacs and last chances. The boxes in my new apartment were half unpacked, the walls bare and echoing with a silence that felt too deliberate. After 6 years with Ryan, silence had become both a comfort and a punishment. We had grown apart in all the ways that matter: words, warmth, and will. By the time I left, there wasn't even an argument left to have. I told myself the move was about starting over, but every night felt like standing in a house built from someone else's echo. My work as a freelance designer gave me enough solitude to drown in, and I was beginning to realize solitude isn't always the same as peace. That's when I first noticed Mr. Hale. He lived next door in a single-story house with white shutters and a porch that seemed too neat to be accidental. I saw him most mornings, watering his plants, reading on the porch, or just sitting with that calm presence people get when they've stopped rushing life. He was in his 60s, I guessed, but carried himself with quiet confidence. His hair was mostly silver, his shirts always pressed. There was something dignified about the way he existed, as if the world still owed him its gentleness. Our first exchange was ordinary. "Good morning," he called, lowering the watering can. "Morning," I replied, juggling my coffee and phone, trying to sound casual. He smiled, a small, knowing curve of the mouth that made me pause. It was the kind of smile that didn't need words to say, "I see you." Over the next week, our greetings became routine. Sometimes he would ask about my work, or comment on the weather like it was a shared secret between us. Once, he handed me a handful of mint leaves from his garden, saying, "For your tea. Freshness makes all the difference." His tone was so easy, so kind, it unsettled me. I learned his name was Martin Hale, a retired literature professor. His husband had passed away some years back, though he didn't say how. He spoke of books the way some people talk about love, carefully, reverently. I caught myself lingering on his words, listening not for what he said, but for the spaces between sentences, the quiet honesty that lived there. One evening, the neighborhood was wrapped in the heavy stillness that comes before rain. I was sketching at my desk when the lights flickered out. I waited for them to return, but darkness held. Then, a knock. I opened the door to find Martin standing there, holding a candle. "Power's out on the whole block," he said. "I thought you might not have any candles yet." He was right. I didn't. I followed him next door, the soft flicker of the flame throwing shapes across his walls. His living room felt lived in, books stacked on tables, soft lamps, an old record player in the corner. Everything about the space felt intentional, grounded. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. "It's strange," he said, "how silence feels different when you're not alone in it." I smiled faintly. "I think I've had enough silence lately to last me a lifetime." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes thoughtful. "Then maybe it's not silence you're tired of, but the kind that doesn't listen back." Something about that sentence stayed with me. The conversation drifted, to books, to life after loss, to the art of starting again when you don't know who you're starting as. He told me he missed teaching, but not the noise of it. I told him I missed belonging to someone, though I wasn't sure I wanted to again. When the power returned, the light felt harsh, almost intrusive. I stood to leave, thanking him for the coffee. He nodded. "Anytime. Sometimes what we need finds us when we stop searching." Back in my apartment, I sat in the quiet glow of the lamp and replayed that line. His voice had carried something soft but weighted. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more, that I found comfort in a man I barely knew, or that part of me wanted to know him more. Lying in bed, I tried to dismiss it. "It's just kindness," I told myself. "He's lonely, you're lonely, that's all." But the thought didn't settle. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping lightly against the windows. I could see the faint glow of Martin's porch light through the curtain, steady and warm. Somehow, that small light felt like it was watching over me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. The days began to fold into each other, steady and indistinguishable, except for the quiet moments that belonged to Martin Hale. It started with small gestures, coffee on his porch, shared glances from across our driveways, until I couldn't tell whether I was seeking his company or simply unable to resist it. Martin's home became a kind of refuge. His presence steadied me in a way I hadn't known I needed. I told myself it was harmless, that it was only friendship. But even the smallest lie can grow roots if watered often enough. He invited me over more frequently, sometimes to help him with his garden, sometimes just to talk. His garden was alive with color, roses, lavender, mint, all arranged with meticulous care. He told me gardening taught him patience, that you can't rush something meant to bloom. I laughed, saying patience had never been my gift. He smiled and said softly, then maybe that's what life's trying to teach you. Our conversations deepened, shifting from polite exchanges to quiet confessions. I found myself telling him things I hadn't said aloud, how Ryan and I had stopped touching long before we stopped talking, how silence had replaced intimacy, how I sometimes wondered if I'd forgotten what real closeness felt like. Martin listened with the stillness of someone who understood. We stopped noticing people, he said one evening, when we begin treating love as maintenance instead of discovery. His words lingered long after I left. It wasn't physical, not yet, but something had crossed an invisible boundary. I caught myself checking my phone for his messages, lingering by the window when I knew he'd be outside. When I wasn't with him, I was thinking about the next time I would be. One evening, the sky turned amber before the rain. Martin called out from his porch, "Come in before you drown out there." I laughed, jogging over, pretending I hadn't been waiting for an excuse. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old books. A record played softly in the background, a slow, nostalgic tune. We talked about literature, about how stories never really end, they just wait for someone to return to them. I asked if he ever thought about going back to teaching. He said he sometimes missed it, but the world had become too loud for his kind of quiet. When he mentioned his late husband, Daniel, his voice carried a tenderness that made me ache. "He used to sit right there," Martin said, nodding to the armchair across from us. "He'd hum along to every record, even the sad ones." I watched his eyes dim slightly, then brighten again when he looked at me. "You remind me of him sometimes. The way you listen, it's rare." The words caught me off guard. I smiled, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through me. "I'm not sure anyone's ever said that to me." He leaned back, studying me quietly. "Then maybe they weren't paying attention." Silence filled the space, heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the rain began, soft and rhythmic against the windows. I could feel the pulse of something unspoken passing between us, not lust, not yet, but a longing that felt dangerous in its simplicity. That night, when I returned home, I couldn't focus on anything. Ryan had messaged, a simple, "How are you? Been thinking about you." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. I didn't want to go backward. Still, I wondered if I was going forward or falling into something entirely different. For the next few days, I tried to avoid Martin. I kept my curtains closed, declined his invitations, convinced myself that space was the cure for confusion. But distance only made the pull stronger. Every time I stepped onto my porch, my eyes drifted toward his. His porch light was always on, a quiet, steady glow that felt like it was waiting for me. On the fourth night, I gave in that it was late, maybe past 10, when I found myself walking toward his house. The air was cool, the sky clear. He was there, sitting with a book in his hands, as though he had expected me. When he saw me, his smile was soft but knowing. "I was just about to make some tea," he said, rising slowly. "You'll join me?" I hesitated on the threshold, caught between sense and desire, between what I should do and what I already knew I would. When I finally nodded, his expression didn't change, just a quiet acceptance, as if he understood the conversation we hadn't spoken yet. Inside, the light was warm, familiar. The distance between us had vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous, understanding that I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this, I was already too far gone to turn away. The night I returned to Martin Hale's porch, the world felt sharper, more deliberate, like everything was aware of what I was about to say before I could speak it. He opened the door before I knocked, a small smile flickering on his face. The faint scent of chamomile drifted through the air, grounding and disarming all at once. Inside, the living room looked the same as always, books scattered in organized chaos, the hum of the record player filling the quiet. But the air between us was different now, charged with the weight of all the things we hadn't said. That he gestured toward the armchair, the one across from his. "Tea's almost ready. I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I admitted, sitting down. "But avoiding you didn't make it easier." He nodded, pouring tea into 2 cups. "Things we avoid tend to follow us anyway." I looked at him for a long moment, feeling the familiar tug in my chest, the one I'd been denying since the first evening the power went out. "Martin," I began, my voice lower than I meant it to be, "I don't know what this is between us. But it's there, and I can't pretend it isn't." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me with the calmness of someone who'd lived long enough to see how fragile honesty can be. "You're not pretending," he said finally. "You're just afraid to name what you feel." I laughed softly, though it sounded hollow. "Maybe I don't even know what to call it." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Connection," he said quietly. "That's what it is. It's not wrong to crave it." "But it feels wrong," I said. "You're older, wiser, someone I shouldn't even," I trailed off, unable to finish. Martin smiled faintly, the kind that carried both sadness and grace. "Affection doesn't ask for permission, Ethan. It just arrives, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly, the rain outside whispering against the glass. When I looked at him again, I saw not the 60-year-old man next door, but a reflection of everything I'd lost, the tenderness, the gentleness, the permission to feel. "I keep thinking about Ryan," I said quietly. "How things ended. How I kept waiting for him to see me again. And then you did." He inhaled slowly, his gaze steady. "Sometimes love isn't lost," he said, "it just changes shape. You were waiting to be understood, not forgiven." Those words settled deep. I wanted to tell him that I was drawn to him not because he filled a void, but because he reminded me of what love could sound like when it wasn't shouting. That I didn't say it. Instead, I said, "When I'm with you, I remember who I am." Something in his expression softened then. He reached out, placing his hand over mine, a quiet gesture, but it trembled with meaning. The touch was gentle, deliberate, human. "I care for you, Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "But not in a way that asks for more. You've been trying to heal, and I think maybe, so have I. We found each other in that need." I looked down at our hands, fingers barely touching, and felt something ache in my chest, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and release. "Then why does it still feel like I'm crossing a line?" I whispered. "Because you're honest enough to know where the line is," he said simply. "And maybe that's what saves us." The record ended, and silence returned. He didn't move his hand away, and I didn't want him to. The air was thick with understanding. No confessions, no promises, just truth, finally spoken. After a long pause, I said quietly, "What I said to you that day, I still mean it. You made me realize I'm really gay, not just because I'm drawn to men, but because you showed me love could still be kind, even when it doesn't last." He smiled then, slow and knowing. "Then maybe that's the kind of love worth remembering." We sat there until the tea cooled and the night deepened. When I finally stood to leave, he didn't stop me. He just said, "Keep your light on. It helps more than you think." Back in my apartment, I looked through the window. His porch light glowed, steady as ever, painting the dark in gold. It wasn't a call anymore, it was a reminder. Infidelity, I realized, isn't always about betrayal. Sometimes it's the heart's quiet rebellion, the moment it decides to feel again, even when it shouldn't, and maybe, just maybe, that's how healing begins. Weeks passed after that night, yet Martin Hale's presence lingered in my thoughts like the faint scent of rain that never quite fades. We had not spoken of what happened, the tea, the silence, the quiet confessions that never needed names. Still, something between us had changed, not in form but in understanding. That I often saw him on his porch, a book resting in his hands, the same calm composure on his face. Our eyes would meet briefly before one of us looked away, as if preserving something sacred by leaving it untouched. It wasn't avoidance. It was reverence that I told myself I'd moved on. My work picked up again, clients filled my days, deadlines replaced longing. But whenever I paused too long, I found my mind drifting back, to his words, his stillness, his unflinching kindness. He had seen me, not as someone broken or lost, but as someone still becoming. That kind of recognition doesn't fade easily. One afternoon, I ran into him at the local cafe. He was at the counter, ordering his usual black coffee, wearing the same navy sweater he always did when the air turned cooler. When he saw me, his eyes brightened with that quiet, knowing warmth. "Ethan," he said. "You've been keeping busy." "Trying to," I replied, smiling. "You still watering that garden every morning?" He chuckled softly. "Habit keeps me alive, I think." I hesitated before asking, "Would you mind if I stopped by sometime? I owe your mint leaves an apology. They didn't survive my balcony." He smiled, a small curve that carried no expectation. "You're always welcome, Ethan. Always." That evening, I found myself walking over again, not because I felt compelled, but because it felt natural, like returning to a quiet rhythm I'd once known. He was reading when I arrived, the golden light of dusk spilling across the pages. "Tea?" he asked, "please." We talked about small things, gardening, music, the changing seasons, but beneath it all ran an unspoken gratitude. There was no tension now, no hesitation. Only a calm acknowledgement of what had passed and what remained. At one point, I looked around the room and noticed a new painting on his wall, a small watercolor of a porch light glowing in the rain. My chest tightened. "You painted that?" I asked. That he nodded. "Inspired by a certain conversation. Do you recognize it?" I smiled faintly. "I think I do." He turned his gaze toward the painting. "I wanted to remember that night without remembering it, if that makes sense." "It does," I said softly. "I think I've been trying to do the same thing." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Then Martin said, "You know, Ethan, love isn't always meant to change our lives. Sometimes it's meant to steady them, to teach us how to keep our hearts open without demanding anything in return." His words settled in me like a calm tide. For the first time in months, I didn't feel restless. I felt present. Later that night, as I walked home, the air was cool, the streetlights humming faintly. I realized something simple yet profound: not every story ends with togetherness. Some end with clarity, and that is its own kind of grace. In the weeks that followed, I visited Martin occasionally. We shared meals, laughter, and the comfort of companionship unburdened by desire. The feelings between us hadn't disappeared, they had simply transformed, gentled into something purer. One evening, I told him about a design I was working on, a minimalist art piece titled Porchlight. It was a tribute to the moment everything had changed for me. "What will it look like?" he asked. "Just light in darkness," I said. "Nothing else." "Because sometimes that's all we need." He smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "Then you've learned what I hoped you would." When I left that night, he walked me to the door. We didn't hug, didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. His porch light flickered on automatically as I stepped outside, casting a warm halo on the steps. Back in my apartment, I stood by the window, watching that same light glow through the dark. It felt constant, like an unspoken promise that what we'd shared would always exist, quietly, truthfully, beyond definition. I whispered to myself, what I said to him that day still makes me really gay, not just because I loved a man, but because I learned love could be honest, kind, and free. The porch light stayed on until morning, and though our story had ended, something within me had finally begun.